Good afternoon. This year it's 20 years ago that I started in real estate. And when I started in real estate, this man behind me, he was sort of the guy in real estate. And he wrote a book, The Art of the Deal. And that book was about deal making and about making money and making buildings. And to be really honest, I wanted to do that as well. And to be more honest, if I would have known that the guy was going in politics, I might have skipped it, but that I didn't do. And I started my company. I started in Amsterdam, and we built it, and we became quite successful. We were, I guess, over the years after, one of the larger developers in Western Europe. But then 10 years later, now 9 years ago, I met this guy. Al Gore came to the Netherlands. Al Gore had just written his book and made his movie, and he was talking about global warming. And to be honest, I wasn't that much of a tree hugger. I wasn't so much of a green knight going around to making green buildings. But he was invited to speak at a breakfast meeting organized by a Dutch CEO, and I was there as well. And I was listening to him, and he had a beautiful metaphor. He was talking about the dikes breaking in the Netherlands, which for Dutch people is a big thing. And the dikes breaking, he said, if that would happen, that's not a political thing. Then people will stand shoulder to shoulder and fix it. And so why is this not happening when it comes to sustainability? And there was a moment to ask questions, and I raised my arm and I said, so why are you talking to entrepreneurs? Should you not be talking to governments or to NGOs, and they should talk about it? And he said, no. He said, the businesses will be the drivers for change. Because if the businesses do not make new products, like cars or like planes or like buildings, then nothing's going to change. And he looked at me and he said, what is it that you do? I said, well, I've got a real estate company. What can I do? And he said, did you know that 35% of carbon emissions in the world come from buildings? I said, no, I didn't know that. He said, but even more important, did you know that from every dollar we spend on solving this carbon emission problem, $1 is best spent in the built environment? And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, very simple. If you build a windmill, if you build solar panels, you always need a subsidy. One day that will change, but for now that's a real big thing. But in the building environment, if you spend €1, there's a big chance you will make it back in 5 or in 10 years. So it actually makes sense to invest in that sector, and you have a lot of work to do. So I got really inspired. I got back to my office, and I got all my people together. Now I have to tell you a little bit about my company. My company was maybe more on the Trump side of things than on the Gore side of things, to be really honest. But we got some people together, and I said, we're going to make green buildings. And they were not really convinced, but one person raised his hand and said, hey, I never dare telling you, but I studied physics, but I actually am an expert in climate modeling. And I used to work for Greenpeace, but nobody's really interested in that story in this company, so I didn't tell you that. And I'm like, okay, well, great, you joined the team. So we started to work, and it turned out to be not that difficult to make a sustainable building. You just, from the beginning, have to look at that issue that you want to solve. And we started to do that. Now, I could also see that some people in my company were not that convinced. They, I was the boss, so they would do it, but they're not really convinced. And I thought, I have to send them a message. Now, for a real estate guy, the most important thing for him in his life is his car. The people were driving BMWs, and they were very happy, and it's an ego thing, I guess. And what I did is, I said, okay, we have to change this, and I bought a Toyota Prius. And I came to the office in my Toyota Prius, and I said, guys, we're going to sell all these old cars, and everybody's going to drive this amazing car, and we can actually see how much energy we use, and that's going to be like a metaphor for what we want to do with buildings. And they were not that happy. And one of these people, he took the car, and he went driving with it, and he came back, and he said, sorry, Koen, I just don't like it. And I became really upset, and I said, this is important, we have to change the world, and what will our customers think if we come in an old-fashioned car? And he said, yeah, maybe you're right, but I've got a better solution. And the better solution is, let's buy minis. Because the carbon emissions of a mini is 104 gram CO2 per kilometer, which is exactly the same amount as a Toyota Prius has. But why not go the cool way instead of, also an efficient way, but not so cool? And so the funny thing was, all these people in the Netherlands were all very tall, and they were in these small little minis. And but that became sort of a funny thing. So we started to do that, and the nice thing was that even students would sort of send us letters and say, oh, we want to work for that company. But it also became a metaphor for our buildings, because we figured out that if we want to make buildings attractive with low emissions, we have to make them nice as well. And sort of the first building we made is this building, Las Palmas. And we actually owned the warehouse, and we redeveloped, retrofitted the warehouse. And on top, we made this sort of UFO-shaped building. It became our own office. And all the technologies that were available around us and that we knew from let's say, universities and from companies we worked with, we put in this building. So solar and wind and all kinds of other technologies. And it became one of the more, let's say, one of the most sustainable buildings in the Netherlands. And today I wouldn't say it's the world record, but it was pretty good. I found it so good that I said, guys, this building needs to be blessed. And you know, who else than the Pope can do that? So let's ask the Pope to open the building. And it's a pity, but we actually asked the bishop in Rotterdam, and the bishop said the Pope doesn't do buildings. And then somebody said, well, let's ask Gore. I said, well, we talked to him as well, and we decided to ask Bill Clinton, President Clinton, and he actually came over, he opened the building, and he became a big ambassador of green buildings and about this building. So the next step for us was that we wanted to do something really special. We figured out there's so much more that we can do than what we have done so far. Let's go out there. And we were lucky to have a tenant, Deloitte, that said we want to have a building in Amsterdam, and we want it to be the most sustainable building in the Netherlands. Now, the people in my company still were a little bit on the Trump side of things, so they said, of the Netherlands is not relevant, let's do the most sustainable building in the world. And I said, yeah, let's try that. But then the question is, of course, how do you measure sustainability? And it turns out in the world there's a couple of models of measuring sustainability. There's a system in the US called LEED. There's a German system, a French system. But probably the most used system in the world is called BREEAM, and it's a system from the UK. And we adopted that system, and we knew there was a building in London that had a score of 96%. Theoretically, you can go to 100%, but the maximum so far was 96%. And we started to work. And you must imagine that if you want to do that, then the thing that is happening is that you have to take all the decisions you take in the development process, and everything you have to try to be as sustainable as possible and put it in a model. So if you order glass, or if you order concrete, or even if you order the car for the guy who is managing the building site, then that car has to be electrical, because even that carbon emission is going to go into the model. And if you want to break the world record, you know, it's not gonna work. And this is what the building looks like. Let me push it again. This is what the building looks like. And it became a beautiful building, but there was one little thing: we didn't make the 96%. We got to 95%. And the one thing missing in this model, the last couple of percentage, is that you have to have so-called innovation credits. So you need to do something that has never been done before in the building industry to get those last points in that BREEAM model. And we went to talk to Siemens and General Electric and startups in Berlin and all kinds of other companies to see if somebody had something that that wasn't used before. And we ended up talking to a Dutch company called Philips, and they make LED systems. And they had a LED system, and you might say, well, LED, isn't that something that everybody uses? That's true. But they had a system where the LED doesn't get its power from a normal 230 volt cable, but from an Ethernet cable, and they call it light over Ethernet. And the great thing is that not only is the cable a lot more efficient, so you save energy, which was important for our model, but the great thing is that an Ethernet cable is a two-way street. So you can get data from that little light and transport it back to a central computer. Now, that part I didn't really get at that time. I was just happy that we got the credits, and the building became 98%, and officially the Edge in Amsterdam is now the world's most sustainable building, well, which is nice, I guess, right? So at the day of the opening, these people that made it, they gave me a book about big data, and I heard about big data, but I wasn't really sure what it was all about. But the sensor that you see here, and we have 32,000 of those sensors in that building, they measure all kinds of information. Suddenly, we can connect to your smartphone, and we know exactly who is where in the building. Now, you might say, I don't really want people to know where I am in the building, but for a building manager, in the old days, everybody would have his own desk, and we all know that roughly 30 to 40% of desks in a building are not being used. I'm not talking about the weekends, I'm not talking about the nights, but within working hours, they're not being used for so many hours. And so, if the building manager knows exactly who you are and where you are, you can actually tell the computer in the morning, you say, hey, I'm going to be working from home till 11. From 11 to 2, I have meetings, well, I need a meeting room. And then in the late afternoon, what I want to do is read a contract, so I need a quiet place. And the building can then adapt to what you're doing. Now, if a lot of people start doing that, then the total amount of space that you save by doing that is 30%. Compare that to what Airbnb is doing. Airbnb is basically doing the same thing. They use the inefficiencies that are around real estate and that we all know and that is difficult to solve. But information will solve that. But then we found out that if you go in this whole world of the Internet of Things, that there are so many more things that you can do. We have a cleaning company working for us. And the cleaning company, the people working there, they have a little iPad. And on their iPad, they can see exactly how often a toilet has been used. They have a heat map where you can see if a floor has been used or not and whether that has to be cleaned. Now, in the old days, cleaning of a toilet would happen, typically at the end of the day. But we all know that it's actually fun that if the toilet has been used for, let's say, 30 times a day, that it gets cleaned. Now, that is now possible based upon the information that comes out of the building. A whole different topic is the whole health in a building. It's sort of weird that we are all okay with a building being in such a fashion that we come in the morning at 9 o'clock, we leave at 5, and at 5 we feel less healthy than when we came in. The air quality is just not really great. Now, if you have 32,000 sensors in a building, it's very easy to solve, because you can, per floor or per square meter, see, are people working here or are they not working here? Let's make sure that the air is going to the right places. Let's make sure that if the windows need to be opened or not opened, all these things can be done automatically, and it's going to be a huge game changer. Now, this is just a start. And the next phase is going to be even more important, because what happens if this is not happening on just one building? What happens if we do that over a whole city? Cities can be connected as well. And what we see today is that a building like Tedx is producing probably 10% more energy than it's using. But that energy that is left over is then going back to the grid. But this grid was built in the 70s, and it's not an amazing grid. Now, if we would have a smart grid, then the building next to it can almost have a 100% efficiency in using that same energy that was used by the other building. But there are a lot more possibilities. One other possibility could be that if the building knows that there's a lot of meetings ending at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, that there's a high likelihood of a lot of Ubers being collected as well. And then with big data, the Uber people already know that that is going to happen, and they can be in front of the building instead of 10 minutes or 15 minutes later. So endless possibilities in a connected city. Has that been done before? Yes. This is a building that my company made in Rotterdam, and it's called a vertical city. And within the vertical city, we already experimented with having apartments, hotel, offices in one building, and we see that we can connect all these different functions in a building. Now, this is Berlin, and this is maybe the difficult part of my story. Why is it that all these buildings that you see in this picture are actually not sustainable? New buildings, relatively easy to solve. Old buildings, a lot of work has to be done. Now, basically the message I have here today is that the new technology and the big data possibilities that we have today allow us to change these existing buildings also into smart buildings. We just have to do a lot of work on it, and we need real estate people and the city to work together to make that happen. I started my talk to speak about Donald Trump and his art of the deal. It was a little bit of a joke, but there's also something serious. Technology is not the problem to make our cities carbon neutral. What we need is a deal. And I think somebody of you should write a book, and it's going to be not the art of the deal, but it's going to be the art of the climate deal. Because we need some sort of deal between the owners of real estate and the people who are governing our cities or our countries to make sure that a lot of action is taken. We have the obligation, and we can do it, to step in and make all these buildings and these 35% of carbon emissions coming from buildings going away. Thank you.